I'm Pastor Wayne Robbins from Christ Church of the Canyon here in Wrightwood. Thank you for joining us today. A couple of things, a couple of prayer requests that I know that you would appreciate knowing about, and we cover your prayers. We've got quite a few folks from the church traveling throughout this coming week, and so just pray for them. I know that they'd appreciate it. They don't really even know that I'm going to ask for prayer for them, but some of you know my son Dakota. He plays drums for us in the worship team, but he's traveling for work. He'll be in St. Louis, Missouri, so pray for him. Pray for Joyce Harold. Many of you know Joyce, and her husband Les. So pray for Joyce as she travels as well. I think she's traveling back to see the Garins. Many of you remember Tom and Nancy Garin, so pray for them as they travel. I'd appreciate it. Okay. Let me pray with you, and then we'll jump into what we have for you in Acts chapters 27 and 28. So we're just about finished with the book of Acts, but let me pray with you. Father, again, thank you for today. Thanks, Lord, for a beautiful day outside here in Wrightwood. It's gorgeous. You can kind of sense that fall is right around the corner, so thank you for that, and we'll take whatever you give us as far as weather goes. And you know what our needs are, so thank you. And I pray again for our country. I pray, Father, for voting sorts of things that are upcoming, that your will would be done. Pray for those who are traveling. Pray for my son Dakota. Pray for Joyce, Harold as well. Watch over both of them as they travel. And they go there to different destinations, but yet are still traveling. So thank you. Guide us and direct us, we would ask in your son's name. Amen. All right, you will need your notes for our time together today, so please download those notes. At least a Bible. You'll need a Bible. There's a map in the back that I may refer to. I did last week. I may refer to this week. We'll see how that goes, but the maps are always helpful. They put them in your Bible for a reason, right? But most of us very rarely spend time in them, so I know that they would, that the people who produce the Bibles would appreciate that, I'm sure. And they're right in the back. They're easy to find. Acts road trip. Last one in is a rotten egg. It has to do, and you'll see how this works out, but they're going to run the ship aground. We talked about that last week. Not an easy task. And the fact that most of the people, all of the people in fact, survived that is nothing short of miraculous. If you've ever been around boats, big boats, you know that running a ship aground is not an easy thing. So, nevertheless, let's read Acts 28, 41 through 44. If we could do that. Acts chapter 28, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, if you have a Bible. It's the fifth book in the New Testament. It is it's denoted as the Acts of the Apostles. It's really more the Acts of the Holy Spirit. So, anyway, characteristically, while you find that, the fellow who wrote most of it, if not all of it, was a guy named Luke. He is also the author of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, the third Gospel. That's him. He was a physician by trade. That's what he did. So he's pretty specific. He's pretty articulate, and so he's the right guy to kind of take notes in regards to what's happening to the Apostle Paul as he travels. And it ends up to us in what we know as the book of Acts. Okay? So Acts 28, 41 through 44. Let's start off by, I'm going to read that, and then we'll jump into some review, and then I have some other notes for you, and then into the narrative, okay? So Acts 28, 41 says, "But they struck a reef where two seas met, and ran the ship aground, and the prow stuck firmly and remained immovable, while the stern started to break up due to the force of the waves." Verse 42, "The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, so that none of them would swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to bring Paul safely through, kept them from accomplishing their intention, and commanded that those who could swim were to jump overboard first and get to land." And then finally verse 44, "And the rest were to follow, some on planks, and others on various things from the ship," things that float. "And so it happened that they all were brought safely to land," which is miraculous. Now may the Lord bless the reading of His holy word. Okay, let's go to the review. This was Paul's fourth missionary journey. Has up to this point, it's right there in your notes, I'm on Roman numeral 1 review, His journey has been a long, arduous trip and fraught with despair, confrontation, and the evaporation at times of hope. It's horrible. All of his missionary trips have been great trips. There's no doubt about that. And I think if he were here right now, if we asked him, hey, would you do it again? He wouldn't waste a second. He would say yes. But for us reading through it, especially, one of the difficulties with reading through God's Word is the timeline's crunched together. You can read through the Gospels, or at least the book of Acts, in a matter of a half hour or so. It doesn't take long, 45 minutes at the most. But it spans a time of almost a decade or less, right around in there. So when we look at the difficulties that the Apostle Paul went through, there's a tendency to kind of crunch them all together, and one happened right after the next, and it's not. There's time and space between them. In fact, before he takes his fourth missionary journey, he spends about 2 years in Caesarea Maritima, which is he comes up from Jerusalem. He's in a set of barracks there. He's not really in jail for 2 years, and so really nothing bad happens to him for 2 years, which is Paul is probably thinking that's pretty unusual, but nevertheless. And so these things don't happen. They happen sequentially. There's a sequence to them, but not one right after the next, after the next, after the next. Okay, so he's in his fourth missionary journey. On his way to Rome via Malta. We'll get to that in a second. But I want to go back and make a quick comment about the ship that he was on. And after further study, I'd mentioned to you that it was a large ship. It was probably a grain ship, an Alexandrian grain ship that he was on, filled with grain, filled with people, 276 of them. And going back through some research on this, there is a couple of comments. One of them is made by a fellow named Josephus. Josephus was a historian during that time, and Josephus spent time on a trip to Rome himself, and accompanied by 600 people on the boat. And everybody stays on the top of the boat there, the deck, right? And that's where they kind of live for however many weeks it takes to go from point A to point B. 600. That's a lot of people. Further research tells us that they've found boats that are almost 240 feet in length. That's a few yards short of a football field, right? So 240 or so feet in length, and almost 70 feet in width, or in the beam of the ship, which is about half the size of a football field. These are big ships. And like I mentioned to you before, that the size of the ship was not exceeded until the 19th century. So these ships served well as far as cargo and people. You put a lot of people on them, and it makes a lot of money for the folks who own that ship. So it was a big ship. By way of introduction this morning, the captain of the ship is desperately looking for a safe harbor. He knows that they gambled on this trip when it left, probably the middle or towards the late part of October. That's when the northeast winds come down from the northeast. There wouldn't be southwest winds if they came out of the northeast, right? And they have a name, and I mentioned that last week. Eurokios is what they're called. But he rolls the dice, and he loses on this one, and they get into 14 days worth of just a huge storm, huge swell, huge waves, terrible everything for 14 days. It's just night and day, all kind of mixes together, and you can guess on the fact that most of those people were seasick most of the time. They end up on Malta, is where they kind of crash land on Malta, not knowing that it's Malta, and I'll explain why that is in a couple of moments. Okay, so let's jump down to the narrative, and I'm in Acts chapter 27. I'm going to go through 39 through 44, okay? Take a drink of water so I can do the whole thing. Now, verse 1, when day came, they could not recognize the land, but they did notice a bay with a beach. That's important. And they resolved to run the ship onto it if they could. They didn't recognize the land, and here's why they think researchers help us to understand that the folks who are running the ship, and the captain, etc., because they don't normally go that way. The storm had driven them to the north part of the island. And basically that's what they were seeing. They usually go around the other side, the south end of the island, and they would recognize that, but they're not recognizing it. So in verse 40, they're just trying to save their lives. They don't care about the grain that's been thrown overboard. They don't care about the ship. They don't care about nothing. They're just trying to save their lives. Verse 40. And casting off the anchors, they left them in the sea, while at the same time they were loosening the ropes of the rudders. And they hoisted the foresail to the wind and were heading for the beach. They put up the foresail because it's gonna grab more wind. It's right at the front part of the boat and hopefully steer them right up onto the beach. But, verse 41, they struck a reef where two seas met and ran the ship aground. And the prow stuck firmly and remained immovable. The prow, or the very front part of the boat, it's stuck. Okay, it's stuck in the reef. It's not going anyplace. But while the stern started to break up due to the force of the waves, the back part of the boat is breaking up. It's been through a really, really difficult time, the boat has, and I'm surprised that it's held together this long. And somebody has to be heard to say, these people have been on this boat for over 2 weeks in storms, etc., and thinking, okay, finally we get a break, right? Finally we get a break. And now the thing is stuck in the reef. Now what do we do? And somebody has to have been heard to say, are you serious? This is the vacation from, and you finish the sentence. It'd be horrible. Verse 42, the soldiers' plan, it gets worse. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners so that none of them would swim away and escape. If the prisoners swim away and escape, guess what's going to happen to the army cohort, to Julius and the soldiers that are with him? They all lose their lives. You can't have any prisoners escaping. And I'm thinking, man, if you're a prisoner, you're probably thinking, wait a minute. I've been through almost 3 weeks of this. Now, again, my life is at stake here. Can you just commute my sentence? Can I get a pardon from the president or something? Then probably followed up with, I'm never traveling with Paul ever again. Well, it is because of Paul who has kept everybody alive. It really is because of God. But because Paul is on that ship, and I made the statement last week, if Paul would not have been on that ship, this ship wouldn't be where it is now. It would have been down in Davy Jones' locker, and those folks would have been dealing with the Kraken out in the middle of the Mediterranean. Verse 43, but the centurion wanted to bring Paul safely through, kept them from accomplishing their intention, and commanded that those who could swim were to jump overboard first and get to land. So the prisoners still got to jump overboard. What if they're in chains? They they have that big cannonball on the end of the chain. Man, they're going right to the bottom. They'll sink like a rock. So maybe they let them go. I don't know. Who knows? But it is interesting because Julius is the man who is the centurion on this boat, and he has final authority over the boat, even over the captain. What he says goes, because he is a emissary from Rome, and so whatever Rome says goes. And so, and he asked for the prisoners to be let loose. Now it's interesting that Julius is mentioned by name a couple of times in the book of Acts. And it's the same Julius, and not Julius Caesar. We don't know what this Julius guy, well, I don't know what his last name is. Maybe it's Smith, or Jones, Julius Jones, maybe. I don't know what it is. But nevertheless, but his name is mentioned. And it's interesting, too, because on some of my other research, characteristically, there are folks out there who think that when a person's name is mentioned, there's a reason for that. And it makes sense to me, but I'll tell you why we think that is. It's because if you, let's say whoever's on that boat, of the 276 people, that story is going to spread like wildfire. It continues on in a couple of moments. It's going to go all over the place, all over the known world, my guess is. Right? Because God saved these people, and they all survived the hurricane or whatever it was. And there's going to be people who are going to say, no way, come on, that didn't happen. What were you drinking, right? By the way, this is water. What are you drinking? What were you smoking? What were you doing? Well, go talk to Julius. Well, here's where he's at. You can go see him and ask him. And so that made a lot of sense to me, that why some people's names get mentioned in the Word. It's for veracity, reliability. Just go talk to them, they'll tell you. Go talk to them. Verse 44, and the rest were to follow. Everybody's jumping over ship, some on planks and others on various things from the ship. And so it happened that they all, 276 of them, were brought safely to land. Nobody drowned. My guess is nobody even got whacked on the rocks, because there's rocks all over this place. You jump out of that boat, chances are pretty good you're going to hit a rock. They all made it. They all made it safely, and they all get washed up on shore. Now what? They don't know where they're at. They're cold. They're miserable. They're hating life. Okay? And like sometimes we get, right? And what I've noticed is when trials and tribulations come our way, as followers of Christ, we have a choice. Well, people in general I think have a choice, but for sure, you can either allow the trial and tribulation to draw you closer to the Lord or to push you further away. And God's not the one that's doing the pushing. That's us. When we go through the trial or the tribulation, we either open our arms widely and say, God, you got to help me and come into this quickly, please. Give me the strength that I need. Or we give God the straight arm and say, I want nothing to do with you. Right? Why'd you allow this? Really? Not God's fault. But that's how people are. So you have a couple of choices. They had a couple of choices. Chapter 28, verses 1 through 10. Chapter 28, verses 1 through 10. When they had been brought safely through, then we found out that the island was called Malta. You can go to Malta now if you want. I mean, you can fly there. Well, I don't know. You can't fly into there. I don't think they have an international airport. I'm not sure where you're going to go. I think it's about 60 miles off the coast of Greece or something like that, nevertheless. And the natives there showed us, Luke is writing this, showed us extraordinary kindness. When he uses the word native, he's not talking about people walking around in grass skirts. They're the people who are indigenous to the island. Okay? It's not in the South Pacific. It's in the Mediterranean. The natives showed us extraordinary kindness, for they kindled a fire and took us all in because of the rain that has started and because of the cold. That was nice. You know? And they probably felt bad. These people shipwrecked. Man, what's their problem? Man, I'll bet you they got an earful. Malta is an interesting island. It's a little bit smaller than the shape of Catalina for us who live off the, well, we don't live off the coast, us who live in Southern California. Oftentimes, you go up to, and I don't know if you've ever been to Inspiration Point. Can you see Catalina from Inspiration Point? Through all the smog and all that stuff. I don't know. Anyway, Catalina is a little bit bigger, than Malta. Plus, it's in the Mediterranean. It's on the Pacific. Pacific Ocean is incredibly cold. You know that if you've been on the beach lately. But the Mediterranean is a little bit warmer. Here's an interesting point, though. The islanders did not speak Greek. Well, most of the people around the boat probably are Greek speakers because that was the language of the day, right? But here's something that's interesting. And with God, there's no coincidences, right? But they spoke a dialect that was similar to Hebrew. So guess who's on the boat who knows Hebrew? The Apostle Paul. Interesting, isn't it? That's kind of weird. What a coincidence. Verse 3 of Acts 28. But when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, a viper, snake, came out because of the heat and fastened itself on his hand. Okay. Verse 4, when the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, they began saying to one another, undoubtedly this man is a murderer. And though he has been saved from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live because he's getting bit by a snake. Verse 5, however, Paul shook the creature off into the fire and suffered no harm. Now, some people are going to say, well, obviously it wasn't a poisonous snake. Obviously it was, because of verse 6. But before I read verse 6, where we live, living in Wrightwood, there are all kinds of snakes. We have seen king snakes in our yard. We have seen gopher snakes. Haven't seen any rattlesnakes yet, but they're all over the place. And if you know your snakes, it's important, especially if you live up here, to know what a rattlesnake looks like. Rattlesnake looks a lot like a gopher snake. except their head is different and shaped differently, and they have this little rattle on the back of their tail. But you got to know them. And these people are on this island. You can bet on the fact they know what a poisonous snake looks like. So it was poisonous. Let's just leave it at that. Verse 6, now they were expecting that he was going to swell up because it's poisonous, or suddenly fall down dead. But after they had waited a long time and had seen nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and began to say that he was a god. It's like swinging from one pendulum to the one side, on your pendulum, one side to the next, right? And my guess is the Apostle Paul is watching all this take place, and he knows what's going on. You know, he gets bit by this poisonous snake, and he's going, Lord, to himself, really? Can we let's just move on. And God protects him, like he did the 276 people, because of Paul. Amazing, isn't it? Amazing. He not only didn't die, he didn't even get sick. Verse 7. Now in the neighboring parts of that place were lands belonging to the leading man of the island, whose name was Publius, who welcomed us and entertained us warmly for 3 days. Who was he? I think that's important to understand, because there's some really interesting church tradition about this guy. What do we know about this guy? He was the Roman governor of Malta. He's the head guy. And my guess is, as this ship is run aground and it's breaking up and these people are escaping, word gets back to him very quickly that, hey, we got an issue here. Church tradition tells us that he was the first bishop of Malta. So he either became a Christian or he was a follower of Christ up to this point in time. We're not sure. And even the bishop thing is you just have to be careful with this stuff. But also, church tradition tells us that after Malta, he moved on to Athens, and he was the first bishop of Athens before, and then martyred there. We know that he was an incredibly hospitable man. Remember, there's 276 people that he basically invites into his house. How'd you like that, ladies? Your husband comes home and says, oh, by the way, we've got 276 people on their way for dinner with us. Just dinner? How long are they staying? We're going to stay here for 3 days. After she falls down and faints and finally wakes up, then she's looking to see, well, what are we going to feed these people? Well, this man Publius had a dad, probably staying with them. And the dad had some issues. In fact, look at verse 8. And it happened that the father of Publius was lying in bed, afflicted with a recurring fever and dysentery. That's not good. Paul went in to see him, and after he prayed, he laid his hands on it, and he healed him. Okay? I wanted to know what dysentery was. I had a pretty good idea. I've never had it, don't want it, want nothing to do with it, right? And here's how it's defined. You ready for this? All right. This is one of those kids need to leave the room kind of a thing. Dysentery is infection and inflammation of the intestines, which causes diarrhea that may contain blood or mucus. That's lovely, isn't it? They think that the dad got it from drinking goat's milk. Now, they're on an island, so you've got goats, you probably got sheep, all that sort of thing, and they're using those animals to live off those animals and drink a lot of goat milk. There's probably not a whole lot of water, fresh water. You know, if you go to Catalina has their own desalination plant over there, and so they make fresh water, or at least partly fresh water for the people. They don't have that on Malta, so they're probably drinking a lot of goat's milk. Well, it's not been pasteurized, right? Where's Louis Pasteur at this point? Well, he's not around yet. And so they're drinking this stuff that's probably filled with all kinds of crazy bacteria. And you're going to have some problems with that. That is my guess. Well, Paul heals him. Well, how do you think Dad feels about that? He's probably pretty excited about it, right? Verse 9, after this happened, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases were coming to him, that's Paul, and being cured. You're darn right they were. Yeah, they're coming to him. Hey, I got this issue. I got this problem. Hey, can you help me here? Paul's going next, 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 next. That's what he's doing. And he's healing them. And the word is going out. And Malta was a major shipping area. And to a certain extent, it is even to today. The main harbor in Malta is a great harbor. And it's a stopping off point, not so much now, but it was then for other people going from point A to point B. So you know that these people, not just the 276, but the people who live in Malta, are sharing this story with everybody they know. And then finally, verse 10, they also showed us many honors, and when we were about to set sail, they supplied us with everything we needed. Now keep in mind that the Apostle Paul and probably a lot of the rest of the people wintered there for 3 months. You're not going anyplace. Now you might be able to take a quick boat from Malta over to Greece up that way because it's not so far away. But still, my guess is after what had happened to these people the last 2 weeks, they ain't getting a boat for a while. So you have in your notes a picture of what's called St. Paul's Bay. Now, just keep in mind, we don't know exactly where Paul came up on shore, but they think that this might have been the place where that happened, right? It's a nice little bay. Well, how did he fit through that little squeeze? Well, they added the rocks in there, my guess is, to keep the waves from coming in. It's a nice little tourist place now, right? Paul would probably be appalled at what he would see if this was the actual place where they kind of got stuck out there a ways, that tipped its way out there. Maybe there was a reef out there and they stabbed the boat right onto that and then had to swim ashore up on the rocks. It's rocky shore. You're going to get beat up. But they all came safely alive, washed up on shore. Nevertheless, a beautiful place, isn't it? Not too many trees in Malta. Everybody's kind of out sunbathing, I guess. Whatever works. Let me give you the takeaway for this, because I think it's important for us, especially as we've looked at just the past couple of chapters in regards to the life of Paul. There are no accidents in life. You know, things just don't happen. There's no coincidences that all this has happened to Paul. It has been in the plans since before time began with God. He knew exactly what was going to happen, exactly what was going to take place. Right? And for followers of Jesus, there is a plan, a purpose, and a meaning in everything that God does. There really is. Even if we think it's the worst thing in the world. Now, if we've caused it, well, then it's a different story. Right? I mean, if they're about ready to yank your liver out because you've been drinking too much, well then, God, why have you done this to me? No, you did it to yourself. Let's just be honest with that. But there are things that come into our lives that we had nothing to do with nor planned. This side of heaven, and we've talked about that, this side of heaven, it ain't heaven. This is not heaven. You know, I'm driving up here in the foothills and stuff like that, and you'll see signs out in front of people's houses. There's just a little bit of heaven. When I look over their place and I'm thinking, man, if that's a little bit of heaven, I want nothing to do with it. Right? A bunch of junk laying out in their front yard and old beat up cars and everything. No thanks. But this side of the real heaven, difficult things happen. Even to Christians. And you look at them and you think, oh man, this person really has it all together, right? Oh man, look at all the stuff they got. Look at all of the, the houses and the cars and the everything. Look at all this stuff. They're famous. They're popular. They got it. They got it all. Well, I don't know if you know it or not. And some of you who are watching this a little bit younger, Loretta Lynn passed away this last week, I think at the age of 90. Big-time country western singer when country western singers were country western singers, right? She grew up, was born in a place called Butcher Hollow. It's called Holler, Butcher Holler. If you're Kentucky, that's where it's at. Kentucky, it's Holler, it's not Hollow. Born in Butcher Holler, Kentucky on April 14th, 1932. She's famous, infamous really, in just her lifestyle and just an amazing person really. And you watch her, and my assumption is, only God knows, but my assumption is that she was a believer and she followed Christ in the early days and even in the later days. But she was famous for writing and singing songs like, now remember this is the early days of country music, okay? One of the titles from her songs was famous. In fact, it became one of the first albums by a female country artist to reach sales of 500,000. But here is one of the titles of the songs that she has written. Don't come a drinkin' with lovin' on your mind. It's good old days, right? Good old days of country. Here's another one. What kind of a girl do you think I am? How about another one? Your squaw's on the warpath. And another one. You've just stepped in from stepping out on me. Those are great titles. How about another one? You ain't woman enough to take my man. And then obviously The Coal Miner's Daughter, which is a great video. I would encourage you to see that and watch it. But I'll tell you this, it doesn't, after doing some research on her life, it doesn't begin to touch on just some of the craziness that she went through and the hard times that she went through. And we think that she's a believer, so she's got all this stuff, so she's got it made. No, not at all. Let me read you this last bit of information, and I'll finish up with you. Loretta Lynn was married for almost 50 years to the same guy, which is really astounding because of his escapades, until her husband died at age 69 in 1996. I'm going to read this to you. If you think that she had it all together, in her 2002 autobiography entitled Still Woman Enough, and in an interview with CBS News the same year, she recounted how her husband cheated on her regularly. You don't get that in the movie. We know that he cheated on her, but he cheated on her regularly and once left her while she was giving birth. She goes on to say that she and her husband fought frequently. But she said that, quote, he never hit me one time that I didn't hit him back twice. They had a horrible relationship. Horrible relationship. So you look at this person and you think that she has it all together. A big house, success, everybody loves her, lots of money, everything she could ever want. And my guess is she'd give it all up for a decent marriage. It's unfortunate. Bad things happen to Christians all the time, and you know that. A lot of you are watching this, and you know that. And this side of heaven, that is part of our life. And so you can either use that trial or that tribulation to draw you close to the Lord, or closer to the Lord, or you can allow it to push you away. You decide. You decide. Okay. We follow Jesus. That's what we do, right? We follow Jesus. I appreciate you joining us today, this morning, or tonight, or whenever you're watching this. Again, to pray for those people who are traveling, I appreciate that. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you, and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen. God bless you. Thanks for watching. Have a great, great week. I'll see you in about 8 days, maybe 7. Something like that. All right. God bless you.